Hey Modrunners, welcome back for another episode. As promised from last week, I have the tutorial on how I actually carved out the dragon scales on the Under Armour here for how to train your dragon too. As you can see, this was pretty extensive, both the front and the back, and about 455 scales, so a lot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you exactly how I carved it out. I'm going to use this scratch piece of leather so you can actually see how the process is. Just remember that when you're doing something like this, that you really take your time. Don't try and get ahead of yourself. Don't try and rush it. It actually took about a week to get these all carved out. And so be patient with yourself. Go slowly. That way you avoid any type of major mistakes. So now let's go over my shoulder and you'll see exactly how I carved it. Okay, so before we begin, let's talk about the tools that you're going to need. First off, you need your leather. The leather that I used for the under tunic was a milled, veggie tanned leather, fairly thin because I wanted it to be flexible and comfortable somewhat after I'm wearing, because I have all the other heavy armor on top of that. So this is a milled leather, veggie tanned leather. A mallet, a spray bottle for wetting the leather down, the swivel knife here, a jeweler's rouge, which is for sharpening the swivel knife. This is a beveler. This is a kind of like a moon stamp. And this is a lifter. Once again, the numbers on the lifter are B60. The beveler is B201. And the moon kind of embossing M882. So what I did is I actually started with the size of the scales that I wanted to do. You can make your scales in any size, but I wanted to kind of figure out exactly what size I wanted to make them, and I wanted mine to all be uniform. You can hand draw in your scales all you want, but I wanted to go with just a pattern. I was figuring that in nature, everything is pretty much uniform. All the scales are fairly uniform, and I'm going to have some natural discrepancies when I'm actually carving it. So for each line, I actually made a large kind of pattern on where I was going to do it. And you'll see when I line these up exactly how it ended up working out. I'll do a few and then I'll do an under layer so you can see them kind of stacking on top of each other. So figuring out the size of your scale first. As you can see from mine, I actually gave it a little bit of a tang down here at the bottom, trying to go off the reference pictures as best as possible from the movie clips. They look like they had a little bit of a tang on them. So that's what I decided to do. They might be straight, but it gives it a little bit more flair, and I kind of like that. So now let's actually go into getting that ready. I forgot to add, it's also helpful to have a pencil because that's what you're going to draw on your leather there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do about three or four scales here instead of doing a whole row. I take my leather and get the tang in there, up, and bear with me because this is going to take a little bit of time. I'm not going to fast forward through it, so you're just going to have to deal with me, but I'll talk to you while I'm doing this. Get an extra one in there. Okay, so you kind of have an idea of your leather there, and once again the scales are going to go up. And obviously with own discrepancies, they're not going to be perfect. I can lay this guy on top depending on how much space you want. Make sure that the next scale above it is going to, which is why I have the single one as well, for getting just individual. When I got into corners and I got off the edge, it was nice to have the single one. So I can single one, or I can just lay these on top. Figure out exactly where you want to have your scales. And for me, I was kind of figuring that the tangs will be right on top of the other scale. So you have that. We'll lay in the bottom one, and this is why I drew in the lines here to kind of figure out exactly the spacing I wanted to have. In the dragon scales, there was actually a little bit more spacing, but for this scratch pattern, I'm going to actually make it a little bit smaller. Let's lay it in right there. And this scratch isn't as large as it probably should be for showing purposes. I think it'll be okay. So you can actually see the lifting. So I'll do these guys here so that you can see that. So that's kind of laid in. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to make sure that my swivel knife is fairly sharp. And to make sure that it's sharp, you have your jeweler's rouge, and you're going to kind of lay it onto the leather itself. Kind of create a little bit of a layer there like that. And then you're going to take your swivel knife and you're going to actually drag it across, nice and easy, and then lift it up. So it's kind of across and then up, across and then up. And as you can see, it's kind of dark, and that dark area is the shavings of the actual knife getting on the leather. So this should be nice and sharp. Now the water bottle. I'm going to wet this guy down. So I'm just going to kind of spray it down. And as you can see, it absorbs the water really well. And now I'm going to cut. Now, when you're cutting, remember this knife is sharp, and you want to make sure that you don't cut all the way through your leather. For what I did is I actually put it on an angle so that it's going to lift. It's not going to completely lift. I'm not going to cut all the way through the leather. I'm just going to lift a little bit out of it. So for me, what I ended up doing is I just went, one at a time. I'm not going to do these guys here. And I'm not going to talk. I'm just going to concentrate on doing this. I'm going to lift it on the edge very carefully, cut through it on an angle. And then the tang. And once again, cutting towards it, I'm going to do this edge, the edge that's furthest away from me. And one more. Okay, and now I'm going to rotate it around so once again that it's lifted. Get the edge here. Get the little tang on the top there, curved around. Curved around. And let's go ahead and do these guys up here too so you can kind of see a few of them so that it's underneath. That guy and that guy. And we'll go back and get this area right here. And this guy. There like that. And as you can see, they're kind of lifted but not cut all the way through. If you do cut all the way through, if you get some leather glue and put it on the back side of it and let it dry, it should help keep it from lifting up. I actually made a few mistakes myself and had to re-glue a little bit, but try to minimize your cutting all the way through it as much as possible. So now that you've got it lifted, we're ready to go on to the next step, which for me was creating the ridge. If you look carefully, each one of these has got a lifted ridge. So what we're going to do is we're going to spray it down again. And you don't have to oversaturate it too much. And I'm going to take the beveler here, and very carefully I'm going to kind of create and press down and up. And once again, I'm doing this side here. Press up. Press up, and once again from the tang all the way up, all the way up. And now for the other side, and you can just rotate your you can rotate the leather, or you can just rotate the beveler there. And as you can see here, one edge is kind of shifted, so that's how I'm doing it. So let's do this side here. And you obviously you can make these as wide or as small as you want. All right, so now you have kind of that raised edge. Even though you've pressed in, it's kind of given that illusion of being lifted up. And now let's go ahead and create some lifting of the actual scales themselves. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take my lifter here, and what I ended up finding that worked best was just to kind of hand press underneath the edges. And the other side. And what this does is it creates a groove so that if you want to actually create a larger indentation or a kind of lifted look, you can now use your mallet, and it's already, look at this side, it's already kind of grooved for you so that you can actually take your mallet here, and I have a piece of stone underneath here so that it makes it easier to actually press. And this creates a much larger lift on all of these scales. And as you can see, I'm kind of going through this a little bit faster than I normally would. Like I said earlier, make sure that you take your time, because if you do pound too hard into this veggie tan leather, you're going to go right through it, and then you're going to have to seal it up with the glue. So just take your time. Creates a nice little lift. Get this going. And that way, it's flattening down the inside and then kind of getting up underneath the scales. And then after I've done that, I'm going to go back through it and smooth it out so that all those different tooling marks. And if you need to spray it again, it looks like it's getting dry. I'm going to spray it again. Just make sure that you go back over it. And your tangs are nice and lifted as well. Cool. And those have all been kind of lifted there, smoothed out. You can also take your beveler if you want, the one that we used, and you can smooth it out even more. It's got a little bit more surface area, so it's a little bit easier to smooth it out. And you can do the lifting before you do the ridges there. I think when I was doing mine, I did the lifting first, and then I did the ridges last. But it's not super important which order you go in. Just you'll find your own groove, working it through. So then there you go. So now those have been kind of given that 3D lift. And then lastly, we're going to take where did I put it? Here it is. This is the, if you look closely, it kind of looks like a moon tool stamping. I'll show you what it's stamped by itself. You can see that that's by itself. And what I did is I just went across it. And you can also spin it in your finger so that way it's not coming out exactly, uniform. Gives a little bit difference. And this is just to create some texture for the scales. If you look really close on the scales themselves, they had some texture to them, which is where I decided to do this. And then as you can see, when my hand is out of the way, so that's some texture there. And then what I ended up doing is I just kind of hand touched it up. Didn't go too hard. Obviously, the harder you hit the mallet, the tool here, the deeper it embosses. And then I just kind of smoothed it out by just kind of roughly going over everything so that it was a little bit more uniform. And there you go. And then after it's all dyed, these will kind of smooth out even more so. You can go through and kind of touch up the areas that you want to touch up. You can go through and kind of give it a little bit more bevel if you want to give it more bevel again. Just make sure you take your time. And that is the embossing and the lifting of the dragon scales. I ended up going through these a couple of times and kind of giving it more lift, just so that it gives it that, once again, 3D lifted, layered look, and they look like scales. And then after you stain them, depending on what color you want to stain them, the stain gets in the grooves really well, and it darkens them really nicely. So that's basically how to make dragon scales on your leather. Cool. Well, I hope that tutorial was helpful for you, making dragon scales. Once again, the movie comes out in a week. Make sure you go and watch it, enjoy it, look at the costume, and see how well you can do some comparisons on what you think of the job that I've done. Please subscribe to the channel. I put out new videos every Friday. They'll always be mixed up between scuba diving or photography or costume making, wine tasting. I hope you have a great weekend. No matter what it is you go and do out there, make sure you find your passion.